So we're in the book of Exodus. We just had 9 of the plagues, and now we're going to jump into the 10th plague and the freedom of the Israelites. We're going to finally do this backdrop, some justice of the crossing of the Red Sea and this big moment of deliverance of the people of Israel. So we're going to look specifically at Exodus 11 through most of 15. By the end of it, they're going to be rejoicing and celebrating their freedom. But right now, we're going to jump back into Exodus 11. We're in the midst of those terrible plagues. Their life is miserable. The Egyptians are really angry at the Israelites for asking to leave just for a festival. Moses hasn't even told them the full plan is for full release to Pharaoh. He's just asking to go out to worship God. That's changing now. We just finished with that 9th plague. Pharaoh is so angry he won't meet with Moses anymore. And so we just see that the 9 plagues have not done what the people want, which is freedom. And at this point, they are still just waiting, right? And so now God needs to show up because Pharaoh hasn't actually gotten any softer to the plan. He's actually become more and more stuck and more hard-hearted through all of this. And that's been kind of, from the beginning, God's been broadcasting this. The point of this happening is because he's hardening Pharaoh's heart and he's going to show himself with all his wonders and splendors. And in this case, that's plagues. If you remember, we've done locust plagues. The wind blew them in, and these great unexplainable events, huge hail like never has been seen before. All of these things have been happening. You got to think that the people are miserable. And remember, some of the Egyptians now are even siding with the true God and listening when Moses gives like an ultimatum, like don't leave your livestock out in the field. And some of them are bringing them in. So really at this point, it's a question of who's listening. And we know that the Pharaoh is not listening, and we know a lot of his leadership is not listening. So we just saw that there's plagues through Exodus 5 through 13. And then we're going to once we hit Exodus 13, we're going to get into the sea crossing. And so again, we're going to walk through this kind of history here. And the thing that I keep drawing out is how often Moses is talking with God, how much conversation there is. Moses isn't just given the plan at the burning bush and then he just shows up. He is reliant on God each step to hear his voice and to see these miracles happen and to know what comes next, right? He wasn't told there's going to be 10 plagues. He wasn't told any of that. So he's been having to kind of go through this process. And, sometimes looking back at these things, we think, oh, it was just the plan and Moses just went with it. But really, he's discovering the plan as they go. He's probably thinking, oh, we're at plague 9 now and none of this has worked. Like, how many more can we go? You just don't even know. There may not have been a huge amount of expectation yet because of how badly this was going. And this could have been going on for months now. So the plagues came in 3 sets of 3 that we've already covered, the first 9. And then the 10th plague is going to come with just devastating consequences. And then there's going to be a setup with it, with a whole feast of Passover and the things that they're going to need to do in remembrance annually from here on out. It's kind of like our 4th of July or Thanksgiving, some big annual feast that they're going to carry on forever. But this is going to be to a memorial of this event of being delivered by God, right, when they go across the Red Sea. And so the sea is then going to be Exodus, the end of 13 through 15. And we're going to see them travel from Egypt, following a pillar and a cloud of fire, completely miraculous. And then the narrative of the crossing of the Red Sea and the Song of the Sea. So this whole portion here in this next hour is going to be filled with the hand of God and miracles. It's not that once they get across the Red Sea and that large miracle happens, like before that, even leading up to it, they're going to have the pillar of fire and cloud. They're going to have that very presence of God with them. I mean, I can't even imagine this. Like it's beyond what we can even understand, right? Because they're having these constant miracles. And then we're going to see them even in the next section later being fed every single day for 40 years by miraculous provisions of manna. So they are getting to see God every single day. They're getting to see his glory. And glory means a miracle. Anything that God does shows his glory. And so here we have this Passover that's going to be one of the most dynamic and large events. It's going to actually reset their entire calendar. Their calendar year and things are going to be set then annually around this Passover and things like that. And so again, this 10th plague is also going to make all of Israel's firstborns God's possessions. It's going to be like, I passed over all your firstborns because of the blood of the Lamb on the doorposts. And from here on out, they're going to be set apart as holy to me. And so he's going to choose the tribe of Levi also at some point to be that to him and set apart as well. And so we just see that there's some really important parts of what's going to come into some of the laws we're going to look at later, and things that are really built off of this, of them remembering God as their deliverer and God as their provider. And so there's two ways they'll memorialize this in their culture: is first an annual feast of the Passover, and second by dedicating all of their firstborns to the Lord. And that's both in their cattle and their donkeys, and also their male sons. Okay, so let's start in Exodus 11, back to Pharaoh and Moses and this major showdown. So Moses has been kicked out of Pharaoh's presence, not to return. So anything here now we're assuming is going to be messages through a courier or something. And so the final plague is threatened. The Lord said to Moses, "One more plague I'll bring upon Pharaoh and upon Egypt." Oh, good. We're at the last plague. Moses finally knows the plan. One last plague. Afterward, he will let you go from here. I would have been thinking after the third plague, 3 plagues? That's pretty good. Are we done now, God? Won't he let us go? Isn't this enough to show your might? And by the 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th plague, I think I would be getting kind of tired of all the back and forth. And Pharaoh, and you're just kind of like, God, why do you let Pharaoh keep lying? He's lying. He's not going to let the people going. Why do you let him do this? Or the deception that he's doing. And so it says after this, he will let you go. He'll drive you away completely. So not only they're going to just go worship, but they're going to just leave. They're going to be free. They're going to be a free people. Can you imagine what this even means? I don't think they could even imagine, right? Their slavery and their mentality of slavery is something they never really fully broke free from. He said, "Now make sure, Moses, that you instruct the people, every man of his neighbor and every woman of her neighbor, to ask for silver and gold jewelry. They're going to be set free in this big and mighty way. Just have them ask for riches. They're going to need it as we go forward." And the Lord gave the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians. Moreover, the man Moses was very great in the land of Egypt, in the sight of Pharaoh's servants and in the sight of the people. Okay, so the Egyptians, not all of them have hard hearts, right? Some of them are now listening to Moses. They know what's been happening, and they're caught on. And so just because the leader is thoroughly hardened doesn't actually mean that all the people in that nation are. So Moses is now informed of this plan, one final plague. They're going to be driven out, and they have such confidence this is going to happen that the instruction to ask their neighbors for silver and gold jewelry is something they're supposed to ask for, right? And this is fulfilling the promise that Abraham was given 600 years earlier, that they would leave with great riches. And this would become a custom that they would use later as the laws get written, that anytime you freed a slave or a bondservant after 7 years, you would send them off with gifts. And so this becomes part of their cultural heritage as well. So Moses said about the Lord, "About midnight, I'll go out in the midst of Egypt, and every firstborn in the land." So the Lord is speaking to Moses, and he says, "At midnight, I'll go out into the midst of Egypt, and every firstborn in the land of Egypt shall die, and the firstborn of the cattle, and there shall be a great cry throughout all Egypt, and all these your servants shall come down to me and bow down, saying, 'Get out, you and all your people who follow you.' And after that I will go out." And he went out from Pharaoh in hot anger. And the Lord said to Moses, "Pharaoh will not listen to you, that my wonders may be multiplied in the land of Egypt." Okay. So Moses is recounting all of this to Pharaoh, that at midnight, that God's going to come in the midst of them, that the firstborn. So Moses did get to go back before Pharaoh. I didn't realize that Pharaoh had kicked him out after the 9th plague. I thought that was permanently, but obviously not. So again, at this point, after that, he went out from Pharaoh in hot anger. Moses was angry when he left because Pharaoh still wasn't listening. And this time Moses lays it out. We're going to all be able to be released here, right? And so again, he says that there's going to be a great cry. And after all these things, that God is saying that all the servants of the land are going to come and bow before him. And so again, Pharaoh says, "Get out, you and all your people." And after that, and so he went out from Pharaoh in hot anger. So Moses is angry that he got kicked out. And so again, Pharaoh's just not going to listen. And God is saying that's so his wonders will be multiplied in Egypt. So everybody in all the surrounding nations, if you remember, even as they go into the promised land or near it, those nations are all scared of them because of what happened in Egypt. They know the God that goes with them. And so God is making his name known. He's making himself known. And really, at this point, you can see that this really is between Pharaoh and God. You can see that there's a lot of anger here, things going on. Moses goes and presents this, gets kicked out. He ends up angry, but it really is between God and Pharaoh. And so God gives the timeline as midnight. All the firstborn male and cattle will die. And Moses leaves in hot anger because Pharaoh just won't listen. So again, it's almost like Moses still wants Pharaoh to listen. And it seems like God's kind of on the other side of like the hardened heart is actually bringing more of the wonders and glory to God. So it's God's plan that Pharaoh doesn't listen so God can do these wonders. Okay, so complex situation, right? Really tough. I'm just thinking, like, what if we're Moses in this situation? You're given an incredible task. You're to go talk to a people or some of the people, and they don't want to listen. And we see this again in like Ezekiel and Jeremiah. I believe Jeremiah is the one that gets listened to the least of all the prophets. Moses is here. He's telling him the right stuff. I mean, this is an ultimatum of like, these people are all going to die under your care, and the Pharaoh still doesn't care. And Moses seems to actually care. He wants to see the message be received well. Because if the message came to Moses, it would be received. He doesn't understand, it's like, it's hard to understand when someone doesn't receive the message. And again, like I said, we see this in Jeremiah and Ezekiel. Why would God put people in this situation? I'm just saying there are times where there are certain people we speak to or even share the gospel to, and they don't listen. They don't want to hear it. Now, in the New Testament, we're supposed to keep sharing with them, right? There's no ultimatum that today you're going to die kind of thing if you don't listen to me right now. But on the other side, we keep speaking. Moses had to go do this 10 times and not quit. God asked him to continue to share a message to somebody who ultimately wasn't even going to listen. And this was part of what God expected from his prophets, especially in the Old Testament. We see that, like I said, in Jeremiah. They didn't listen. He gets carried off with them to exile into Egypt, I believe, with him. And they still wouldn't listen. And so, again, the faithfulness of Moses is being faithful to God, not the results of what Pharaoh hears or what he does. And you just have to think a little bit here. I think Moses was still hopeful a little bit, which doesn't make sense because he's been told from the beginning it wasn't going to work. Pharaoh was always going to have a hard heart. And so it is kind of exposing, right? You start to see the human condition of Pharaoh's heart is truly hard and is not going to listen to anything. And even after this, we'll see Pharaoh pursue the people of Israel to his own demise, right, in the Red Sea. And so this isn't, I think it's kind of it's a telling story. It's an exposing story of what's really going on. And I'm sure it was very difficult for Moses, who was one that was willing to hear God, that was one that was teachable and listening. And this seems so difficult to understand, right? Those people whose hearts were so different from his own. And so just as God's prophet, I just love how faithful he was to continue to do the hard thing, even when it seemed fruitless. Like if you came out of a ministry like this, right? People be like, well, how many people got saved in your meeting? And Jeremiah would be like, none. And Ezekiel be like, nah, not really. I'm still speaking to them as they're getting carried off, right? And so we see this happen in a number of these. Now, we do see other cases where Joseph and Daniel provide good counsel, and the rulers of those nations do listen to them. So I'm not saying this is always fruitless in the sense of the outcomes we want, but like you see here, God's glory is still going forth. Moses is still his spokesman, and we're still seeing God's wonders and signs and miracles. And so I just want to make sure that as we ever enter into a speaking ministry of any sort, we understand that we're supposed to be faithful to the message God gives us, and it's supposed to be there to give people the opportunity. And I love that word, opportunity, that a lot of times the prophets are actually giving people an opportunity to show their hearts, to expose them for what's really going on, because otherwise we wouldn't know, right? Unless God had confronted Pharaoh, we really wouldn't have known here. And so this is really an opportunity to Pharaoh and any of the Egyptians. And so again, that's kind of where we leave Exodus 11. We step into Exodus 12. And now the instructions are going to change from Moses and Aaron speaking to the Israelites. They need to prepare them for what's coming and get them ready to go through this Passover. This is going to be a huge display of God's protection, right? Some of these plagues have already been only over the Egyptians, and some have been, split from the Israelites. But this one's going to be very definitive, and they're going to take an active part in what they need to do. They don't need to bring cattle in out of the field or do anything like that. They need to have a meal and a feast and put blood over their doorposts. And so this would be quite obvious. This is them entering into an act of faith with Moses, right? If this plague wasn't coming and they didn't believe a plague was coming, they wouldn't have done this. I'm just thinking back at plague 1. If Moses had given this instructions to them, would they have been able to listen and understand that God was going to do these things and trust Moses? Probably not. But at this point, the Israelites Moses has their full attention. He's become their leader through this process. And over the few months or even year that this has been going on, he's really risen to that leadership and they're listening to him now. Remember, at first they were upset because they had the heavier burdens of having to find hay and straw for the bricks. And now I think they're starting to see that something's going on here and God really is doing something. And so they're willing to listen to him. And so they say to them, this month shall be for you the beginning of months. It shall be the first month of the year for you. Tell all your congregation of Israel that on the 10th day of this month, every man shall take a lamb for a household. Your lamb shall be without blemish, a male of 1 year old. You shall take it from your sheep or from the goats, and you shall keep it until the 14th day of the month, when the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel shall kill their lamb at twilight. Okay. So this is very clear instructions that they're given. They're allowed to group in households. They're going to sleep overnight together. It's going to be a communal experience. They only need 1 lamb for however many people were going to sleep in that house. And it needed to be the amount of people that could eat the lamb and not have a lot of leftovers, because they're going to have to burn the leftovers. They don't get to keep any of it. It really was for just this feast. So they're gonna do this, and it has to be a male 1-year-old lamb or goat. So lambs and goats are very genetically similar, just as background. There's quite a few times in the Old Testament when lambs and goats, there's not a lot of distinction made, especially in the sacrificial system. Sometimes maybe there is, but sometimes they're not. It's kind of seen as a similar animal here. So for this, it could be either way, lamb or goat, whatever, but it needed to be without a blemish. It needed to be a good, you're not sacrificing some lame lamb that you're going to have to put down anyway. This needs to be one of your good ones. And so again, they're going to do this particular feast in the ways that it's being given, and they need to follow instructions. If they don't follow instructions, their lives are on the line here. And so the significance is going to also start the new calendar and for their new nation. Between March and April every year is Passover. We typically on an American calendar would also know that around the time of Easter, now Easter's not exact, they don't always line up, so be clear with that, but just kind of the same time period. It could be a sheep or a goat, and it was to be the 10th day to the 14th day of this month. And they kill the lamb on the 14th day. So they're going to have like 4 days, and then on the 4th day or 5th day, they're going to actually have this big feast. And that's the way some of their feasts work. They were week long, where you don't do any work, and then on the last day, you have this big meal together. And it should be a household meal. And this is where we actually get communion from, is from this meal, right? Jesus then has the Last Supper meal, which is the Passover meal. And from that Last Supper meal, we call that communion in the church. It's a time when our church comes together in unity. We do it now with usually little wafers and little tiny things of grape juice, but in general, it comes from this feast of remembrance of the lamb, that they have to, the slain lamb, right? It's blood over the doorposts and the deliverance of God. And that all foreshadows what Jesus was going to do on the cross. Now, they didn't know that at this time, but that's why God's making such a big deal of this feast, is because of what it's going to mean and how Jesus is going to fulfill it. He's going to fulfill this Passover with his death and resurrection on the same feast dates in his time period. So he's going to have this Passover dinner. He's going to go to the cross as the slain lamb and fulfill all of this. And so we see that happening in the New Testament. I'm just kind of throwing that in to tell you where this is foreshadowing. And that's what the Old Testament really is. We see Moses is a prophet, and he's foreshadowing the ministry Jesus will have as the ultimate prophet. We see a lot of foreshadowing. A lot of these, they call them types and antitypes, as a symbol or a shadow in the Old Testament becomes fulfilled in the New Testament. So what they're trusting in here is a slain lamb to keep them alive. And in the New Testament, we also rely on a slain lamb to bring us life, right? And so it's kind of the same picture. And so they're putting faith in God here. And they're doing that through the symbols and the means of the times, which is killing a lamb and putting the blood on the doorposts. And so that's what's expected in the Old Testament for a life of faith. Okay, so they're giving more instructions, and they're going to have to follow all these. They're to take some of the blood and put it on the 2 doorposts and on the lintel of the house. So basically, put the blood all over the front door, and they shall eat the flesh that night, roast on the fire with unleavened bread and bitter herbs. They shall eat it, and with their belts fastened and sandals on your feet and your staff in your hand, and you shall eat it in haste. It is the Lord's Passover. So they're all going to be in this house gathered together on this last night of this kind of week-long or partial week, 10th to the 14th. And the lamb is to be roasted and eaten. They are to also have unleavened bread and bitter herbs. As we see unleavened bread, it means that they're going to have to go in haste. There's no time for the bread to rise. And so that's why they always memorialize this feast every year. They're going to have unleavened bread. It's going to become a major part of it. That unleavened just means like what we would consider more of a cracker or a wafer. It doesn't have that fluffiness like bread, right? There's no yeast. And to get that yeast and that rise takes hours. And the whole point of unleavened bread here is that they're going to have to leave quickly in the middle of the night or early in the morning as they're fleeing, and they don't have time for their bread to rise that day. And so God's kind of putting that symbol directly into their food here. And that's why even on the Passovers of Jesus' time, the night before he was betrayed and everything, that night, the same night he was betrayed, it was an unleavened meal. And so there's no leftovers of the lamb was going to be allowed. They had to burn all the extras. And these bitter herbs they were to have with it were to symbolize their hard lives in bondage. Bitterness. This wasn't supposed to be necessarily a good meal, right? The lamb was, the bitter herbs is a little, and then the unleavened bread isn't necessarily as tasty as something else, right? But again, that's not the point of the meal. The meal is to be in haste. It's to be a little bitter, and it's supposed to be communal. And so again, this is how they're going to do this, and they have to put the blood on the doorpost. Like I said, it's a faith thing. Note here, this whole nation was to be a nation of priests. They were all to sacrifice their lambs. There was no specific priesthood where they took the lambs at this point. By Jesus' day, they took the lambs to the priests, had them sacrificed there. The apparent intervention of the Levites in Chronicles was contrary to the original design of the Passover here. There were no priests, no altars, no tabernacle. Families were coming together in the presence of God and around the sacrificial lamb that was a substitute for each member of that family. The lamb was to be a year-old male because it was taking the place of Israel's firstborn males who were young and fresh with the vigor of life. And so, again, they needed to sacrifice this lamb so none of their firstborn males would die. Again, this is the setup. There wasn't a priesthood. There wasn't anything at this point. And this was the original design. We'll see that change as we go into the next set of books, Leviticus and Numbers and things. But at this point, they're all to be doing this before God and to be communing with God. So God gives a little bit more instruction. For I'll pass through the land of Egypt that night and strike all the firstborn of the land of Egypt, both man and beast, and all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgments. I am the Lord. The blood shall be a sign for you on the houses where you are. And when I see the blood, I'll pass over you, and no plague will befall you to destroy you when I strike the land of Egypt. So God is the one that's going to pass through the land to execute judgment. He takes full ownership. He doesn't say, I'm going to send demons to do this. He doesn't say it's Satan. He says he's the one that's going to execute the judgment. And it's going to be on all the gods of Egypt. And the gods are known to be idols. They're known to us, right? The gods, we would consider them demonic entities, usually that would try to inhabit the idols, those types of things. So God is basically saying, I'm going to do a very spiritual war here against the gods of Egypt. And it's going to play out. And what's going to happen is God's going to go through the camp and kill all of the firstborns that do not have the blood on the doorpost, which means the Egyptians. They weren't given this provision, or they weren't in the camp of the Israelites at this point. There were some Egyptians, we have to assume, that had moved into the camp of the Israelites and would have gotten the instructions because they end up going out with them. And so again, this is really important that we read this passage for what it says. It says that God will strike the land of Egypt. And by the firstborns dying, this is taking on their major god, which is, they thought Pharaoh was the son of the god. So he wasn't going to be protected. His firstborn was in line to his throne. He was to be the next Pharaoh. And so it's basically saying that that firstborn son was not of the gods. The gods couldn't even keep him alive compared to this God. It was a major showdown. It also was against the goddess of fertility, the goddess of protection. All of these different gods were falling that night because God was showing himself bigger than anything Egypt had. There was nothing their gods could do to reproduce this or stop this. And so again, these miracles have been ever increasing, right? The first couple of miracles, the magicians kind of reproduced in some way or another. But after a couple, they could no longer even do that. And so God is the one that will pass through the land to execute judgment. Every god of Egypt would be judged in this final plague. It would spare no firstborns, not of the cattle, not of the people. It was the Lord who would do this. The destroyer was not a demonic power. It was either God himself. In Psalm 78:49, it says God's wrath and anger is called a band of destroying angels, or it was an angel God sent. But whatever was going on here, this was by the hand of God and was as a judgment. I know that can be difficult theologically. How do we have this God who loves and wants everybody to be redeemed and all of this? But at some point, for us, we understand this in the New Testament. After we die, we will face judgment. This is a very real consequence of people that harden their heart and don't love God. They don't want to be with God for eternity. And so, again, it's a little different now. We don't see these kinds of plagues, at least currently but again, God handles things as he needs to, and that's really God's way of dealing with things. It's not something that I'm going to necessarily comment on here because we don't always know the ways of God. We're trying to learn all of this as we go, right? And so this day, God just says this is a really important day. It's going to be a memorial for them to keep the feasts. Throughout the generations and statutes forever, you should keep the feasts. 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread. On the first day you shall hold a holy assembly, and on the seventh day a holy assembly. No work shall be done on those days, but what everyone needs to eat. For 7 days, if anyone eats what is leavened, that person will be cut off from the congregation of Israel, whether he's a sojourner or a native of the land. Okay, so again, this is now saying, this hasn't even happened yet. We're going to do this first Passover, but this is going to be annual. It's going to be 7 days long. No unleavened, all unleavened bread for all 7 days. If there's any leaven even in the camp, meaning any balls of yeast, any starter pieces, anything, all of that needs to go outside the camp and be stored during this feast. None of it's allowed in the camp. And if anyone's found with it, they're going to be cut off. In other words, if there are people that aren't willing to memorialize this feast, they shouldn't even be with you. If they're not serving the one true God who freed you from Egypt, they shouldn't be in your assembly. And then they're going to do a holy assembly for these days. And on the seventh day is the one. And he says, even if the person is a sojourner or a native of the land, it doesn't matter who they aren't allowed to have leaven in the camp. And so the two feasts here, there's going to be two feasts that kind of come together, the Feast of Unleavened Bread and then the Feast of Passover. They're back-to-back feasts. We see this even in Jesus' day. They're still being kept this way. So we have an unleavened bread feast for 7 days, and then at the end of that, we have the Passover feast. And so again, there's 7 feasts that are going to be laid out, but some of them are back-to-back or kind of combined feasts. And so it's not like there's a full, there are full 7, but some of those kind of merge together at the time of year or the weeks that they're on. This mighty event was to be annual. It was to have a lamb, unleavened bread, and bitter herbs. Some commentators hold that the yeast symbolizes impurity or corruption. So they were supposed to be spending 7 days with unleavened bread to even ready themselves for the Passover feast. Again, this points that foreigners were allowed to be among them, but the foreigners needed to be serving the one true God. Some of the Egyptians are even going to go with them. And so we do see this. It's going to be called a mixed multitude at some point here. So Moses now is still giving instructions, and he calls all the elders of Israel, take a bunch of hyssop and dip it in the blood that is in the basin and touch the lintels and the 2 doorposts with the blood that is in the basin. None of you shall go out of the door of his house until morning, for the Lord will pass through and strike the Egyptians. And he gave them this instruction. Okay, again, any of the Bible verses I'm reading here, I've shortened a bit just so we could get through them all. I wasn't going to read 5 chapters right here. So anyway, going back to this, the elders have more specific. They need to use some sort of hyssop plant to put the blood around the doorpost. This is specific, right? And they are to stay inside all night until God tells them or gives them it's all clear, right? You don't want to accidentally be outside at the wrong time. Again, they don't have clocks, so when God says midnight, it's probably a little bit more of a time frame than an exact number on a clock. Now with our satellites and watches and phones and everything that sync up, we know exactly when that is. Again, they would probably need to be inside for a several hour window. You don't have a sundial in the middle of the night. There wouldn't be any specifics really that would be telling them what time it is. So they just need to stay inside, right? This is, and it's communal. They're to stay in the blood of the lamb, all of that. So whatever they need to get ready to do that, without indoor plumbing, no details there, but there's a lot of things that go on that he's instructing them about here. And just, to make sure that even if they hear cries or noise outside, don't go out, I think is also important. So again, very clear instructions, right? Don't go wandering the streets. And when you come to the land that the Lord will give you, okay, now we're moving into something new. We're going to move into land promises and like future, right? They're not even going to hit the land for 40 years. He's now saying, I'm taking you to the promised land. Now, again, they don't know that they're going to rebel and have those 40 years of wandering and all the things. They probably think this is going to be a pretty quick trip, a couple of weeks, go to the promised land. I don't know how you fill that in. It's still, they knew the promised land was already inhabited by 6 other nations. That'll come up. And when your children say to you, when you get to the promised land, what do you mean by this service? You shall say, it is the sacrifice of the Lord's Passover, for he passed over the houses of the people of Israel in Egypt, when he struck the Egyptians but spared our houses. And the people bowed their heads and worshipped. The people of Israel went and did so. So the Lord had commanded Moses and Aaron, so they did. Can you imagine? Moses and Aaron are speaking to 1, maybe even 2 million people here. And they are giving them clear instructions, and the people listen. So what Moses just has gotten kicked out of Pharaoh's presence probably a few hours earlier, he goes into his own camp, and he says, this is what's going to happen. I need you to listen. And they listen, and they bow, and they worship. Their hearts are not hard. Now, we will find out later they have stiff necks, but right now they are ready to follow God. They are understanding this is a very solemn moment. And I mean that in that God is going to visit the camp tonight. They all have to stay indoors. They've been given clear instructions on what that looks like. It'll be very obvious if anyone deviates from those instructions. And so God is giving them what they need in this. They're to teach their children from here on out about this day. This is going to be such a significant event. It's still being, still even today, people celebrate Passover, right? We definitely all look at Easter and things like that for looking at Jesus and what he did. Like these significant moments for them and these feasts were to be part of their understanding and to help them as a community of faith. So this didn't get lost. Do you know how easy it is after a couple of generations to forget why you're doing something? And he's telling them, this isn't just supposed to be a feast where we eat a certain way. We need to remember why we're doing it. And so they follow the directions, and Moses is pretty solidly seen now as their leader, right? That's not even going to be an issue anymore. He is the leader. The 10th plague comes. At midnight, the Lord struck down all the firstborn in the land of Egypt. And there was a great cry in Egypt, for there was not a house where someone was not dead. Then he summoned Moses and Aaron by night. Be gone and bless me also. So we see here that God does exactly what he's said he was going to do. Pharaoh summons Moses and Aaron, even at night, and then he tells them to leave, but also bless him first. The Pharaoh is, his heart is absolutely hardened, but he's letting them go because of the great pain. They've lost so many of their children. Everyone at this point is grieving, right? How many people, you probably lost brothers and children and all kinds of things. And a huge amount of their flocks are just dead in the field, right? Any of the firstborn cows, you wouldn't even necessarily know which ones those were, but they're gone. The plague had no natural explanation. It was exactly timed and specific to the firstborn people and animals. There's no way in any of the commentaries to explain this by any natural occurrence. It's not like, you get certain infections or diseases that hit at an exact hour only the firstborn male of all people and all animals. It's not a thing. Many Egyptians died that night. Pharaoh does not just release them for a 3-day festival. He just tells them to leave completely. They are being driven out. He didn't want them there anymore. The God they had with them was causing all of this trouble. Pharaoh now wants a blessing from Moses' God, which is a strange turn. And you'd think at this point, Pharaoh's heart would be softened. We'll find out rather quickly here that he pursues them and changes his mind again. So we see the Egyptians were urgent with the people to send them out of the land in haste. For they said, "We shall be dead." The people of Israel had asked. So the people of Israel asked the Egyptians for the silver and the gold jewelry and the clothing as they plundered the Egyptians. And plundered means they asked for it in this case. It's plunder is something you get after you win a war. And so basically God has showed down their gods and they've won the war and they get their freedom, and because their God is bigger than the other God, and they haven't even had to fight a battle, but they get plunder as though they did fight a battle. All the Egyptians wanted them gone. They had to leave very quickly. They had homes, they had livestock, they had all this stuff to take with them. And how are they going to do that? I mean, I don't know if you've ever prepared for something that you have to do very quickly. There's a lot of things that happen very quickly, right? Sometimes for a long time. I just heard somebody talk about, as their wife was going to have a baby, and for like 6 weeks, the doctor had been telling them, any day now. And they were kind of, everything's packed and ready to go. But can you imagine here, the entire nation of 1 to 2 million people had to up and leave at the same time. I mean, in our day and age, we just see like when Florida has a hurricane coming or LA has some sort of mass exit for some reason, you see all the freeways blocked up, everything happens. But here they're having to pack up any of the goods they can carry. This is everything they're going to take with them. They're moving their homes. They don't know exactly where they're going to end up. None of them have probably been to the promised land. And I mean, I don't know about you, but I was just thinking of like all of the different things that you have to do when this happens. You need your cookware, you need your clothing, you need your bedding. What are the things that you get to take? If you have chairs, you don't get to take them, right? We see this like back in the Oregon Trail. They said people would put all kinds of things on their in their wagons, and then partway down the road they would find different furniture pieces because they just didn't need it. It wasn't necessary to how they needed to travel. I'm just wondering, where did they all get the tents? If they've been living in some sort of like mud bricks or anything that would be more structured, they're now going to all of a sudden need to change their living style to tents. As nomadic people, that wouldn't have been that difficult, but it doesn't seem like that's what they were. And so I was just thinking all the logistics that come with this, of having to move 1 to 2 million people. They also have been completely dependent in Egypt on the food sources. So maybe some of them have a little bit of food, grain with them. You'd load all that up, but how long is that going to last, especially when you are going into a desert with a bunch of animals? Can you imagine how hard it would be to leave in haste? Like, you're leaving everything. I don't know if somebody came into your house and said tomorrow night or tonight, you're going to eat a meal and then you're just going to leave everything. You're going to just take what you have and that's all you get to take with you. And so go home and pack your stuff. A lot of the stuff you have, you don't get to take. Mementos and things and books, probably not going with you. And so again, I can't imagine that this was easy for them. Yes, they're leaving slavery, but they're also leaving there's some comfort and stability, especially with people that have lived in one place for hundreds of years. It's hard. And they were given gold and silver and things like that they asked for. They also had to carry that off as well. And so again, just thinking through how difficult this situation would be. I think sometimes we overlook it. We just think, oh, they're free, and it's like, yeah, but they don't have a new house to move into. They actually are going on now a very long desert trip. And this is going to be very difficult. And so the people now are very unsettled. And you've got to think that that's going to come up in the next chapters as they grumble about a lot of things. And I'm not saying they have reason to, because God provides for them. But they are very unsettled at this point. And the people of Israel journeyed from Ramses to Succoth, about 600,000 men on foot, besides women and children. And that's where we get our idea that there's 1 to 2 million, because you have 600,000 men, military age males, or over a certain age. And so it could have been anywhere between 1 and 2 million people here. And then a mixed multitude also went up with them, and a very much livestock, both flocks and herds. Mixed multitude means foreigners. So probably some Egyptians, other people that had also settled up in this delta region of Egypt. Remember when they came down into Egypt, Joseph asked that they be settled in part of the land that the Egyptians weren't in as much, up in Goshen. It was a really good area. It was fertile. It was by the sea. But again, it also probably was a bit of a trade area. So they probably had a lot of other mixed people with them. And they baked unleavened cakes of dough that they had brought out of Egypt, right? That's all they had time for, was to cook bread that didn't rise yet, for it was not leavened, because they were thrust out of Egypt and could not wait, nor had they prepared any provisions for themselves. So they didn't even get a chance to make breakfast, is basically what this is saying. And they're going to have to make that as they go. It's going to be unleavened, and it's just going to be whatever they can eat. They had a big feast the night before. So a mixed multitude, right? And so this is a huge amount of people, sheep, goats, cattle, everything they owned, donkeys. They had this, and they had to take everything as they went. Okay, and so I want to also just jump into the fact that there is this narrative, but Psalms fills in a few other details. Psalms 105:37 says, Then he brought out Israel with silver and gold, and there was none among his tribe who stumbled or was feeble, some translations say. So again, that's what Psalm says about this. So he's bringing them out with great provision and health. And what we see is there was none who stumbled or who were feeble, which is an amazing thing to say about 2 million people. They weren't sick. And so we get some thought sometimes that there was some healing that occurred as well the night of the Passover, that as they were eating and having communion and the Lord passes over, that to say that none of them were going to stumble or be feeble here is a big statement. And so again, something was going on. There was probably some sort of miracle that they all left strong and healthy. They were all capable of starting out on this journey. And so I don't know, it's just kind of one of those like hidden little things in Psalms where we see the provision of God. And he's going to promise to them later, if they follow his ways, he won't put the diseases on them of the Egyptians. So there's certain things that are going on here with God and the people that are just kind of alluded to and aren't fully unpacked. But it is an amazing thing. And I just think a lot of times as we approach communion, looking backwards to the cross, they were doing Passover looking forwards to the cross. You know, those are the same things that we do now in faith, looking at what Jesus did, trusting him for our healing, trusting him for our salvation. They were having to do the same things back then. So it says the time of the people of Israel lived in Egypt was 430 years. At the end of the 430 years, on that very day, all the hosts of the Lord went out from the land of Egypt. So this same night is the night of watching kept to the Lord by all peoples of Israel throughout their generations. So he says that the very day, 430 years to the very day, as he'd promised, this thing happened. They could have marked their calendars to it. They could have known that this was coming. And so all the lead-up plagues started in plenty of time to make sure that this happened by this night. We don't know if Moses was aware of that. He probably was, because he's the one that wrote this later on. But that this was happening exactly on the time frame of God. Not 430 years, sort of, not a day late, not a day early, just completely the way God had prescribed this to happen. Okay, so again, it says in the future that all circumcised males are going to need to join in. Even the sojourners and the strangers would keep the Passover to the Lord, but they would have to be circumcised first. So there was inclusion into the camp of the Israelites of foreigners. There was provision made for that through circumcision, and they would be able to celebrate feasts and things. There would be certain limits. It would take generations before they could join in certain kinds of temple worship, things like that. But again, the foreigners, if people were willing, and we see this especially in the story of Ruth, she was a Moabitess, and she was willing to come and serve the God of Israel. We see this also with Rahab, and she comes into the people group. And they actually even become part of Jesus's lineage. And so, again, there is this sense that it wasn't like Israel was the only one that could follow God. Other people could, but they'd have to join Israel in the way they did things, and circumcision and feasts. Again, there's just more things that were given. They were supposed to do this Passover in commemoration. Again, there's also now in Exodus 13:1, the Lord said to Moses, consecrate to me. Remember, the Lord is speaking to Moses over and over and over here. He's giving me instructions. They're speaking all the time. Like, can you imagine being a leader? And God says, and now this, and now this, and now this. And I think that's the way we're supposed to see leadership, as constant communion and communication with God. He doesn't just say, go do this thing. Even with Moses, he says, go build this tabernacle. And then it says, to every last detail of how many square feet and how it's all going to be laid out and this and that, and what color this is going to be. I mean, God picks out the curtains. And I'm not saying that we need to do that in all of our lives of churches, but just the specificity and the ongoing relationship here of God wanting to communicate, of wanting to be a part of everything. And so he says, consecrate to me all the firstborns. Whatever is the first to open the womb among the people of Israel, both man and of beasts, is mine. This means the males. So the firstborn children and the firstborn cattle and donkeys and all of that are now God's. He wants them. He's claiming them because he spared them. So he should own them. Later, the tribe of Levi would become God's too. This would become the priesthood. But the firstborn, males only, they were owned by the Lord, which means that they were set aside to do not just common, but to God and his work. The males did non-priestly work around the tabernacle, those firstborn, at least at this stage. That was what was later. This would be transferred to the Levites, who would substitute for these firstborns. So at this point, this is how it's being laid out. Humans had a 5 shekel price to buy them back, to ransom or redeem them back to common use. So if you come up with 5 shekels, you didn't have to be dedicated to the Lord, and you could go get what would be considered more secular or common use job. The donkeys could be bought back with a lamb or a kid. If not bought back, the donkeys were unclean and could not be sacrificed, so they would be killed by having their necks broken. The firstborn lambs and things could be sacrificed and holy unto the Lord for that use. And so again, we see all of these things being laid out as to why they had to do these consecrations and things for these firstborn. Okay, so Moses said to the people, remember this day in which you came out. So again, this is going to be a perpetual feast. He's going to give them more kind of direction here. He says, today in the month of Abib, you are going out. And when the Lord brings you to the land of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, Hivites, Jebusites, which he swore to your fathers to give you, a land flowing with milk and honey, you shall keep the service this month. Okay, so he's telling them all about the unleavened bread they're going to use, how this is going to work because they need a memorial. And he says, and it shall be a sign on your hands as a memorial between your eyes, and the law of the Lord may be on your mouth. For with a strong hand the Lord has brought you out of Egypt. So they're going to keep this every year. So again, he's telling them that yes, the land they're going into is occupied by a lot of other people groups, and they're going to win, and they're going to be able to live there. And so he says this is going to be an annual feast to him, tell their children, and continue the tradition, continue talking about him. Normally we think of the law as like laws and rules, like, don't murder people and things like that you need. But there was also this set of laws that here, basically it's like saying this feast is a law. Passover is one of their laws. And the way they celebrate it has some very specific rules with it, right? To be circumcised, you have to do certain things, no leaven, and they have to do it. So this would be like in our day and age saying Christmas is a week long. That's a law. Everyone has to participate in it, and nobody can do any kind of work for that whole Christmas week. Okay, we don't normally think of that, but that's what law meant, the Torah meant to them. It was more of the ways of life. It was much more encompassing than just mere laws of morality or things. It actually encoded for them how to live before God with him as their God. And he was their God and wanted to be. He was their deliverer, and they needed to celebrate that. And so he told them exactly how to do it. And they needed to do it his way. Okay. So again, we don't necessarily, when we say the law in the Old Testament, we usually think about the 10 commandments, no murdering, no stealing. But in their law as well was they had to have these feasts and they had to do them God's way. Okay. So he says again, he's going to bring them out, that he was the one that has redeemed and opened the wombs. So therefore the firstborns are his. He says, every firstborn of a donkey you shall redeem with a lamb. Or if you will not redeem it, you shall break its neck. Every firstborn of man among your sons you shall redeem. And when it's time to come, your sons ask you, what does this mean? You shall say to him, this is the Lord who brought us out of Egypt, right? And so again, they have this whole set of things that they have to do because the destroyer passed over their firstborns. There's this idea now that Passover, there were 3 things that Passover means to them in this time. First, the Passover passed over their firstborns. Second, Israel's going to pass over the Red Sea. And then they are going to give or pass over their firstborns to God. So as God passed over their firstborns, they now have to hand over or pass over their firstborns to God. That wording's used. They would have picked this up in the original wording. And they're going to also pass over the Red Sea. It's kind of the idea. And so this idea of the Passover being celebrated was celebrating many issues of Passover. It was the Passover of death. It was also the Passover of the sea. It was everything that this feast was supposed to mean for them as the beginning of a nation. And so it's really kind of their national celebration with God. Okay, so getting back into the nuts and bolts of what's happening here in the narrative, when Pharaoh let the people go, God did not lead them by the way of the land of the Philistines, although that was near. God said, let the people change their minds when they see war and return to Egypt. But God led the people around the way of the wilderness towards the Red Sea, and the people of Israel went up out of the land of Egypt equipped for battle. Okay, so interesting passage. There's 3 routes of escape they could have taken. One to the northeast, going towards Philistines in Gaza or Canaan area. They were not going to take the shorter route. The Philistines were up there. And why couldn't they just go straight up, into the promised land? Well, because the Philistines were there and they were warriors. And God knew that this people would not fight a battle and would just turn around and go back to Egypt. They would change their minds. They weren't battle ready. And we see this as kind of an irony here in this, because it says the people of Israel went up out of the land of Egypt equipped for battle. So God's like, they won't do that. And the people are like, we've got our stuff. We've got our swords and our shields and we're ready to go for battle. And God's like, no, you're not. And so he actually leads them downward, a middle route heading toward, their other option was a middle route or then the southern route into the wilderness. And he leads them straight to the Red Sea, which is going to be a dead end. This makes no sense. Let's just march 1 million or 2 million people right out to the edge of a sea river crossing. It was a large body of water there in the Red Sea, and let's just have them here. Interestingly, they were equipped right for battle. And so God's like, we're not going that way. We're going to go this other way. We're going to go hit a dead end, basically. And so that's where they are. But I just love how the people thought of themselves differently than how God saw them. He knew that they wouldn't be able to take on a battle at this point. They were just freed slaves. This wasn't in them. They knew nothing of that. And they weren't hardened for it and ready for it. And so again, as much as they think they're ready to go take on the world, he's kind of like, they're not. So he's going to do something else. Moses took the bones of Joseph with him, for Joseph had made the sons of Israel solemnly swear, God will surely visit you and you shall carry my bones up from here. This is going to fulfill Genesis 50:25. So we see that happening too as they're leaving. And they're going to move on from Succoth and a camp in Etham at the edge of the wilderness. And the Lord went before them in a pillar of cloud to lead them along the way, and by night a pillar of fire to give them light, that they might travel by day and night. The pillar of cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night did not depart from before the people. Okay, so trying to move 2 million people, like I said, they're going to need to be moving more than just in the daylight. So, and it's hot. And so I was reading some of the commentaries and they said this was not a small, like what we think of as maybe just like a tornado cloud kind of pillar, like, just, maybe the size of a person or two. This would have been a large cloud probably over them, maybe protecting them from the sun, shielding them. And they're following that. At night, it would have lit up the area so they could continue walking. So this was not just a little pillar out in front of the first set of people. There's 2 million people here all having to continue on this journey. And they need a lot of the day and evening time to be able to walk. And so God is lighting it up. So this is not something that is a small thing. In Psalms 105:39, it describes this. It says, he spread out a cloud as a covering and a fire to give light at night. So you get this sense that this is a much larger thing, maybe a spreaded cloud than just even a pillar. The cloud provided shade in the intense desert heat. Was kind of the feeling you get from the Psalms. Again, these locations they're walking between aren't exactly known. It was a long time ago. It was in a desert. So probably the desert of Shur. They're walking in some sense eastward out of Egypt. And so whether it's north directly or southward, somewhere along that, the Red Sea pretty much covers a lot of that area and a lot of other lakes and other things through there. So there's a lot of areas where they can be all the way down to the bottom of the Red Sea. There's been proposed areas. Again, at this point, it's mostly just they're walking. They're getting started. It was a visible sign of God's presence in their midst. This was an ongoing miracle, right? And anytime there's a miracle, even a cloud, and the presence of God's there, that's the glory of God showing. Sometimes this pillar is given other names. Another name is the angel of God. We see that in 14:19, 22:20. The angel of his presence in Isaiah 63:8 and 9 is another name for the pillar. The messenger of the covenant, the owner of the temple, similar to the burning bush and the angel of the Lord being equated. So, right, because that burning bush and the angel of the Lord, here we have the angel of God and this pillar. So it's the presence of God. It's his very presence. God speaks from this pillar, just like he spoke from the burning bush. In 33:9, he speaks, and in Psalms 99:6, he speaks to the people. And so we see that this idea of a pillar isn't just like, I know sometimes when you're a little kid on the cartoons or flannel graphs, it's just this little pillar in front of the people. It's the size of maybe a couple of people, and it leads them around. That's probably not what's going on here. It's probably more of a cloud and then lights. And it would have been very noticeable that there had a miracle among them, and they would be able to follow it. So as they get to the Red Sea in Exodus 14, the Lord said to Moses, "Tell the people of Israel to turn back and encamp in front of this one area of the sea." And for Pharaoh will say to the people of Israel, "They're wandering in the land, the wilderness has shut them in, and I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and he will pursue them, and I will get glory over Pharaoh and all his hosts. And all the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord." And so they did so. And so basically God's saying, I'm taking you on a dead end. There was this area, you could have gone through the Philistines, that would have been straightforward, but you obviously look like you don't know where you're going. And Pharaoh's going to see that, and I want him to think you don't know where you're going. So he'll pursue you to come get you back and be like, you didn't know where you're going. You guys are running out of food and water out here in the desert, and bring you back and capture you again back into slavery. And so God brings them into this impossible situation, to a dead end with a sea on one side and the Egyptians on the other. Pharaoh had rebelled, and he basically said, over my dead body, am I going to let those Hebrews leave? And so again, this is him going back on everything that he had said. And so the Red Sea, a little bit about it, there's a couple of different things. It could be the Reed Sea in Exodus 14. Again, wherever it is a large enough body of water to destroy the army. This is not a small body of water. The Red Sea is definitely large enough to do this. There's only a few places, though, in the Red Sea that were crossable. We'll get into that in a little bit. The Hebrews lived in the northern Egypt, and the Red Sea does not extend that far up, so they would have had to go down a little bit further south. Today, the areas like the Suez Canal, but they probably have traveled south somewhere in Egypt, which then would take them down to the Reed Sea or the Red Sea area. And so there was a lot of lakes and rivers and things through here as well. But again, it had to have been a major body of water to have drowned an entire army. So please don't think of this as just like a little river crossing or something. It's plausible that they traveled south instead of east, just due to some of the layouts of Egyptian garrison along the eastern path. Again, the translation of the body of water in the Septuagint was the Red Sea, and the literal meaning of the Hebrew name was the Sea of Reeds, or the Reed Sea. The variance between the Hebrew and the traditional translations, especially the Septuagint quoted by Jesus, is among the reasons why it is not 100% certain which body of water is being referred to. Okay, so some places say Red Sea, some say Reed Sea, and this has been the issue with the older Hebrew manuscripts not quite matching up. Again, it could be, it's a big sea. And so different bodies of water. There's a Gulf of Aqaba. There's a body of water near Elam. There's the Gulf of Suez. There's the Red Sea. Modern archaeologists and peer-reviewed sources have not officially looked for chariots in water locations. Just, there are claims out there on the internet of chariot wheels and things like that. Again, 3,500 years is a long time for wooden wheels to last underwater. The Egyptian government makes it nearly impossible to look or remove for study any objects. They don't even want them looking for them. And so as far as peer-reviewed sources, there haven't been any up until at least today, and that can always change. Amateur archaeologists, however, are a different thing. There are a lot of claims that wagon wheels in certain areas of the Red Sea have been found, or the passing, or there's certain coral reefs areas that are higher than others, or things that could have been there. It's interesting But legally, it just can't be investigated properly because of the Egyptian government. That's just known. Again, so just know that whatever you're hearing, it's not peer reviewed for many reasons. And I mean, there are interesting theories. The Bible's not terribly clear about where the crossing is or exactly how it happens. We just know it did happen. And that's all that we really need. And I'm just going to say that, like, you can get into all these details if you want, but really I prefer, honestly, here to look a little bit more deeply at Moses, his interaction with God, how God's moving in miracles with the pillar of cloud by day and fire by night, and what God's doing. He's hardening hearts, he's softening hearts. And I do understand that some of these details are important. I put in a few maps even at the end about some of the possible crossing locations. And you can kind of make those decisions for yourself. Again, it's all conjecture. When we get to heaven, we can ask God. But until then, I don't think, we might find certain things in archaeology and things like that at times. My faith honestly just doesn't depend on knowing every last detail. I do know this happened and that God is the one that did it. So we see Pharaoh now. He's going to make his chariots ready with his armies. They take 600 chosen chariots and all the other chariots of Egypt with all the officers. So this is not a small feat. They want 1 to 2 million people back. Israel went out defiantly, right? And now as they're being pursued, they feared greatly. So I'm just reading from verse 8 to verse 10, the change in the Israelites. They left defiantly, and then they revert to great fear when they're being pursued. So, right, they're not war ready. and they said to Moses, it's because have you taken us to die in the wilderness? What have you done to bring us out of Egypt? And so it would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness. So their trust is gone. They don't trust Moses anymore. He says, fear not, stand firm. And the salvation of the Lord, which will work for you today. For the Egyptians who you see today, you shall never see again. The Lord will fight for you, and you have only to be silent. We have no idea how Moses knows this. He probably has already talked to God about it or had some sort of instruction we don't know about, but they're not going to see them again. And he's promising that. They're like, wait, how's that going to work? You haven't been able to get these guys off our backs yet. And here they are pursuing us. And so here we have the Israelites panic when they should be trusting God who just sent the 10 plagues to deliver them. Remaining enslaved seems safer to them. And you'll kind of see that mindset continue. They're not really warriors ready. They're not really ready for any of that. Moses instructs them, don't be afraid, stand firm, be still, and be silent. God's going to fight for you. That you're going to watch and you're going to see the salvation of God. You don't have anxiety, don't have panic here. Just be still and just be ready. The Lord's going to fight for you. We're going to see this same expression at other times, like 2 Chronicles 20, when God promises to fight for Jehoshaphat, that Judah would not need to go into battle with the other tribes around them. All they're going to need to do is be silent and wait on the Lord. And the Lord said to Moses, why do you cry to me? Tell the people of Israel to go forward. Lift up your staff and stretch out your hand over the sea and divide it, that the people of Israel may go through the sea on dry ground. And I will harden the hearts of the Egyptians so that they shall go in after them. And I will get glory over Pharaoh and all his hosts, his chariots, and his horsemen. And the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord, when I have gotten glory over Pharaoh, his chariots, and his horsemen. Well, God getting glory over them doesn't mean that they're going to see God's glory. They're all going to be dead. It means that God's going to get glory among the eyes of everyone else who's still alive. Now, the Lord is instructing Moses. So we don't know where he got the instructions earlier that this was all going to be handled, but he knew. Moses is to lift up the staff. The water's going to part and the ground's going to be dry. That's a miracle, right? The bottom of a lake does not just dry. I've watched ponds dry out even, and it takes a long time for that mud to finally dry out. Usually there'll just be like a hard surface on it or something, but not dry. This is a miracle. Lakes tend to have a large amount of mud, muck, and sediment, and this is going to be passable almost immediately. We do not know how long Moses must lift his staff. In later battles, and he has to have others help hold up his arms. He has to keep holding up his staff. We don't know if this is just a one-time hold up your staff for a few minutes until they part, and then God's going to do the rest, or if he needs to stand there for some time as this happens. Again, we say in Isaiah 63:12, it says, with his glorious arm dividing the water before them, to make for himself an everlasting name. So it says his glorious arm divides the water, meaning God's arm. So Moses' arms is the extension of God's arm here, as Isaiah is showing us. And so we just see that this is going to be really an act of God, not just a staff in Moses. It's not magic. It's really an act of God. And the angel of God who was going before the host of Israel moved and went behind them, and the pillar of cloud moved from before them and stood behind them, coming between the host of Egypt and the host of Israel. And there was the cloud and the darkness, and it lit up the night without one coming near the other all night. Okay, so wait a second. There was a cloud and darkness, and it lit up the night. Darkness, light. What's going on here? And so we have this pillar of God, or this cloud and fire, and it comes between the two camps. A dense fog, a thick cloud is impassable. And so it's possible that the Egyptians were seeing the darkness and the Israelites were seeing the light. But in whatever case, they couldn't reach each other, right? And God is doing this. He's no longer leading them from in front. He's now becoming their rear guard and protecting them. And this is going to give the Israelites the ability to cross the Red Sea without the Egyptians pursuing them. It's going to let them go about their business in any way they need to without the Egyptians even seeing anything go on. It's possible that this was a glory of God was being seen by the two different camps in two different ways. It's just possible. It's a conjecture. But again, we do know there was light and darkness going on here. And the Lord is going to separate these two camps yet again, right? The Egyptians, the Israelites are not being treated the same. One's going to have safety from the other. So Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord drove the sea back with a strong east wind all night and made the sea dry land, and the waters were divided. And the people of Israel went into the midst of the sea on dry ground, the waters being a wall to them on their right hand and on their left. Okay, so again, why we have our lovely backdrop here is because just this event is massive. It's an east wind that comes. And if you get the idea that this is just a couple feet of water and the wind is enough to blow it apart and hold up the walls, that doesn't make sense in physics. Number one, that water wouldn't crash back over an entire chariot set and kill everyone. I mean, there wasn't anything that survived when the water came back down. So this has to be deep enough water to actually drown people. They couldn't swim out of it. It had to have been deep, right? Second off, the walls of water are walled up on either side of them. That's a very unusual thing. That is not a natural phenomenon. It's not like the water in a river just dried up because there was an earthquake or something for a little while. No, this is a lake that is being divided, and it's walls and walls of water here. And so again, this is definitely, and any wind that would hold water back is also a wind that would make it so people couldn't walk on the dry land. So this is not just a natural strong wind that continues. Can you imagine if you were 2 million people with little kids and all of this trying to walk with a huge wind of 90 miles an hour? Number one, that wouldn't split water. And two, there was water on each side. The ground dried overnight. A strong enough wind would have made it physically impossible to cross. People would just be blown into the walls of water, not actually able to walk. This was not natural. The water could not have been that shallow, right? There was some conjecture that possibly this was like an ice too, because there was congealing at the blast of the nostrils. The waters piled up. The flood stood up in a heap. The deeps congealed like ice, or congealed, not conjectured like ice, possibly in the heart of the sea. The waters become hard like stone in the face of the deep, frozen, it says in Job 38. Not necessarily about this event, but about other events. We don't know exactly what was going on here. And so again, this is a new beginning. You have to think that whatever dried it out, the ground was dry. It wasn't just ice. They would have slipped and slid if it was. So not sure at all what's going on, how this is working out. But again, this whole thing isn't about the physics or how this is working in the natural, because it's a miracle. We just kind of move that aside and we start to look at what does this mean in the theological sense. This is a creation event. We see the same thing in Genesis 1 with the wind and the water. The water covered everything and the dry land had to be separated. And it was the ruach, the wind or the Spirit of God that comes. Same type of wording. Noah's flood, we see the wind or the Spirit of God come, the ruach of God, as a recreation event, right? The whole world is covered with water. Again, they come to an impassable water, just like the world was covered with water in Genesis 1 and the flood covered the world with water. What happens? Both of those need creation events. They need dry land. Noah needs dry land, and here they need dry land to cross. This is supposed to symbolize a recreation event or a creation event. The waters, the wind of God, all the wording they would have recognized as a creation event. This was a creation of a nation. This was as they passed through, God creating them as a people. No longer would they just be a bunch of slaves. They would actually be a nation of 1 to 2 million people. Okay, this is a new beginning for God's people. They now have a day of festival that they're going to celebrate annually because of this, right? All these things of the Passover. By redemption, Yahweh is creating Israel as a people for his own possession. This Exodus is a new beginning, and they would have understood that. They're going to walk through the water, the divided water, and start over. I put some of this in your notes about this. This dry land creation is part of, like I said, the original creation and the Noah event. So they have dry land created for them here. So they are a new people. They are a new nation, and they're going to be able to cross over and start fresh, no longer captive to others or part of someone else's nation. The Egyptians pursued and went in after them in the midst of the sea, and all of Pharaoh's horses, his chariots, and all his horsemen. And in the morning, so the entire army, this is a massive army, is pursuing them. They all can be in the sea. This is not a small river crossing. Like I said, this is a sea. The pillar of fire and cloud looked down, and the Lord is looking down on them, on the Egyptians. And it says, and in the morning watch, the Lord in the pillar of fire and of cloud looked down on the Egyptian forces and threw the Egyptian forces into a panic, clogging their chariot wheels so that they drove heavily. And the Egyptians said, let us flee from before Israel, for the Lord fights for them against the Egyptians. So they're thrown into chaos. The cloud basically has followed them as they've gone into the sea. And we find a little bit about this in Psalm 77, 16 through 20. And I want to just go there for a minute because it explains what happens here in this moment of the cloud and the presence of God coming on the Egyptians. When the waters saw you, O God, when the waters saw you, they were afraid. Indeed, the deep trembled. The clouds poured out water. The skies gave forth thunder. Your arrows flashed on every side. The crash of your thunder was in the whirlwind. Your lightning lighted up the world, and the earth trembled and shook. Your way was through the sea, your path through the great waters, yet your footprints were unseen. You led your people like a flock by the hand of Moses and Aaron. Okay, so did you hear this? This cloud poured out water, it thundered, it flashed arrows, thunders, whirlwinds, lightning lighted up. The earth trembled and shook. So basically, the cloud of God comes over their army right over the sea, lets out a bunch of water, thunder, lightning, and shakes the whole place. Can you imagine their horses, everything? We usually just think of the water just crashes nicely over Pharaoh and his armies and they never see them again. No, but first the presence, that cloud follows them in, and God's very presence is what keeps them entrapped in this place. Okay, so again, we just see this as much mightier when we add the Psalms in and hear the recounting of this, that it is a major event. The people would have known it was the hand of God doing this. There would have been no question. It wasn't like, oh, the water just came back. Like, not only are we free, no, they actually saw God just absolutely throw chaos into the camp of the enemy as they were crossing. So God tells Moses, stretch your hand over the sea, that the waters may come back on the Egyptians. So Moses stretched his hand over the sea, and not a one of them remained. So nobody swam out of this. This was not a retrievable situation at all. There weren't a few survivors from this. Not a one remained as this happened. The sea returns to normal, and all the horsemen and chariots were gone. Psalms 136:15. So the Lord saved Israel that day, verse 30, Exodus 14, from the Egyptians. And Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the seashore. Israel saw the great power the Lord used against the Egyptians. So the people feared the Lord and believed in the Lord and in his servant Moses. Okay, so you would have thought they would have already gotten that after Passover. But here they have now just really experienced what God's presence can do. Can you imagine now having this cloud lead you after it just did this? Can you imagine the fear now? They've seen it with their own eyes. It's not the firstborns over in that other Egyptian area. These are people they are finding dead on the seashore. They've seen God actually do this. The wilderness journey starts with the sea parting, and it's going to end with the parting of the Jordan River. They're going to see God move for the next 40 years with them. God's justice and mercy is revealed. It says, what then shall we say? Is God unjust? Not at all. Romans 9:14. Moses wrote, I will have mercy on whom I have mercy, and I'll have compassion on whom I have compassion. God forgives the stiff-necked people after rebellion, idolatry, and other issues, but God hardens Pharaoh's hearts, and judgment comes. Scripture even says about Pharaoh in Romans 9:15 through 17, I raised you up for this very purpose, that I might display my power in you and that my name might be proclaimed in all the earth. So Pharaoh was allowed to take his position just so he'd have a hard heart, oppose God, and God could show himself great. God has reasons for having created these rebellious people, just so he can show his mercy on whom he will show his mercy. And he hardens those whom he wants to harden. And shall what is formed say to him who formed it, why did you make me like this? Does not the potter have the right to make out of the same lump of clay some pottery for noble purposes and some for common use? So basically it's saying God's not unjust because he did this. God is merciful because he did this. If left up on our own, right, all of us would be the hard-hearted ones. But God has mercy on some of us, that he's made us to be soft towards him. And that's just something we need to be thankful for. Okay, so that's the theology of what's going on here. I just want to make sure that we hit some of those points, because anytime we have these major things happen in the Old Testament, we can get this idea that God was a wrathful God back then, but not now. God was a God of justice then, or mercy at different times. That's not the case. God is consistently God, and this wasn't just a time of him trying to be more wrathful or judgmental. He is doing what's right and just, and with the amount of oppressed people here, he's setting them free. He's giving Egyptians every opportunity to turn to him. And I'm going to continue to use that word. God is God of opportunity, of mercy. That's what we mean by mercy and compassion, long suffering. He gives them a long time. 10 plagues is a lot, and they still won't let these people go. And he deeply cares about these people and wants them free. So again, I threw in some points just on the topography. The Red Sea is a difficult thing because it dips to 1,000 to 2,000 meters. And just to put that in perspective, our Grand Canyon is 1,600 meters. So there are some areas that the Red Sea dips deeper than the Grand Canyon. So a normal 2 million people group cannot go down into the Grand Canyon and back out in one evening. That's not possible. So wherever they were crossing obviously was not at the depths of the Red Sea. So they would have had to be in some of the only passable areas. So I put a little bit of a relief map in, and it just basically shows that different relief sections, there's 3 cross sections. It shows the depths. You see some of those going down to like 1,000 feet, some of them 1,000 meters, 2,000 meters, 1,200 meters. So a lot of the areas of the Red Sea would have been completely impassable. Just the bottom tip area would have been, and maybe some of the areas in the northern area. Again, even at those areas, it goes down to 200 meters. 200 meters is plenty of water to take out a bunch of chariots. So just think through a little bit. Some of the crossing points of the Red Sea, there's a lot of it that was not crossable because of the Grand Canyon size trench at the bottom of the Red Sea. And so that's why some of the people in the commentaries speculate that it could be some of the lakes above the Red Sea or other places where they still would have had this same problem, where they would have been completely entrapped against a body of water. Again, not going to speculate. It could be at the base of the Red Sea as well. So I just threw that in there just so you'd have a little bit of sense of topography. I just love looking at some of that in today's topography to give us a little bit of just science. I don't know. I don't want to make Bible study ever about trivia because there is so much theology here. And so we move into Exodus 15, and Exodus 15 is basically the celebration of who God is. It is a song. And it's the first part that we're going to cover. Exodus begins with Pharaoh's edict to throw all male infants into the river. The portion of the book closes with a song and dance of celebration because the warrior Yahweh has thrown Pharaoh's army into the sea. So, Moses, when he was a baby, was going to be thrown into the river, and now God has thrown this whole army. So we just see that the book of Exodus is already, just in these 15 chapters, gone from a horrible beginning to a wonderful ending of God's strong power and display of his glory. Okay, so I'm not going to read all of this song. It's a beautiful song. You should read it. I'm just going to talk about it a bit. It's 4 stanzas or strophes, same as stanzas. And it has a beautiful design to it. I put it in the notes. Each section starts with something about, oh Lord. It's going to talk about a few things about God. So the first part's my strength, my song, my salvation, my Father God. Are the words that stand out, talking about God in that first strophe. And then after that, in the strophe, it's going to talk about what he did. And so it's going to be about the Red Sea. The flood covered them. They went to the depths. And so we see this pattern play out 3 or 4 times here throughout this song. It'll then go back to the Lord, your power, you shattered your enemy, your greatness, you overthrew, you consumed your blast. And then it says, what God did to them. I'll pursue them, I'll overtake them, I'll divide the spoils. and I'll draw my sword against them. And then the next one, it's the Lord. It's about the Lord. He's majestic. He's glorious in his deeds. He stretched out his right hand. He swallowed them. His steadfast love. He redeemed. He guided. And then it says the people heard. They trembled. They pangs. They dismayed. They trembled. The terror and dread. So it tells how people reacted to that. And then it goes back into talking about God, who purchased, who brings, who plants, who establishes, and who reigns. And we don't have a refrain on the last strophe about the people. So that's the 4 sections to this song. Each of them starts, like I said, with "O Lord," and kind of ends with each of the first 3 strophe. They went down to the depths like a stone. They sank like lead into the mighty waters, and they are still as stone. And so when we start to see these songs, we realize that there's actually a lot of structure to them, and they're meant to say something. We see that there's a liquid and solid, down and up, trembling and unmovable, death and life contrasts. There's contrasts throughout this. As we look hermeneutically, we want to draw these things out. We want to look at the structure of this song. We want to kind of get the feel for what's going on as an overview, as well as just loving the song for being a great song of praise, which, I mean, you could probably turn this into a song even today. Pharaoh's army is thrown into the sea and sinks like lead. Israel be led up, right? So we have these ups and downs. We have trembling and not being moved, contrasts in this song. So we're constantly seeing contrasts. The design, like I said, is four strophes, which are stanzas. Each strophe has the intro about the Lord, a 2-verse confession, and then a 2-verse narration. Confession being who is God, and then the narration is how we respond. The strophe starts with the greatness or works of God, then moves to the response of nature or the people. The first strophe is nature's response. The second one is the Egyptians' response, and the third is the surrounding nations' response. The surrounding nations all know about this, and it will evoke the fear of God, is how it ends. And so, right, we have nature responding to God, we have the Egyptians and responding, and then we have all the surrounding nations. And so we're just seeing that in this whole song, why it's being written, the greatness of God, and then all the people, the different groups, nature, the Egyptians, the surrounding nations, all get to come into the song and how they respond to that. Okay, so then we have one real short narrative right after the song that says, "For when the horse of Pharaoh with his chariots and horsemen went into the sea, the Lord brought back the water of the sea upon them, but the people of Israel walked on dry ground in the midst of the sea." So that's kind of in the midst of this. And then we have the Song of Miriam, which is much shorter. And this is a very short. Then Miriam, the prophetess, the sister of Aaron, took a tambourine in her hand, and all the women went out after her with tambourines and dancing. And Miriam sang to them, "Sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. The horse and his rider he has thrown into the sea." Can you imagine the celebration at this point? Miriam is a prophetess. She writes this song. She's the one that leads the women out. She's Moses' sister. Remember the one that pulled him from the Nile, or was there watching when that happened. She danced, and for the first time in the Bible, as an act of gratitude and worship. The second dance will be later in Exodus. And again, other Old Testament prophetesses are in Judges 4:4, 2 Kings 22:14, and Nehemiah 6:14. So prophetesses were a thing. We just see that she is able to lead worship. She's being able to get people to follow her. And so this is really a celebration, not just of their salvation from slavery and of this mighty work, but also the creation of this nation. And so they have a new start. They end. And what did God say? Moses, you're going to come back to this mountain. They haven't gotten there yet, but you're going to worship. And so you see the first thing they do is worship God. That is their response. Can you imagine the relief and then the worship that comes from that? And so this is where we're going to end. This part is with this great miracle of God, the crossing the Red Sea, and then the worship that comes from the people's hearts. That they're not just being forced by law to love or celebrate God. They're doing it now willingly with tambourines and dancing and celebration. This is their great victory. And they get to have the victory even though they didn't fight the battle, right? God just said, stand still or walk across the sea and I'll fight for you. So just whenever we come to the end of a battle, I just want to remind us, this is the proper response. Write a new song, take up a dance, whatever it is to God. When he fights battles for us or with us, however that battle ends, this is the way our heart posture should be. And it's something that we definitely learn from the Exodus.